I have to be honest with you about something. When I first heard that Mark Davis was personally picking up the phone to negotiate with Tyreek Hill, my first instinct was to treat it like another off-season rumor, the kind that floats around every May and quietly disappears by the time training camp opens. But the more I sat, absolutely get to that, because of who Mark Davis is, and because NFL owners do not personally insert themselves into player acquisitions unless the stakes have moved well beyond what any normal transaction represents. This is not a depth signing. This is not a situational piece being added to fill a gap on a depth chart. When an owner steps around the entire organizational structure and drives a negotiation himself, it means the financial commitment on the table is serious. And the internal belief is that this one specific acquisition could be the line between a good team and something that opposing coordinators genuinely lose sleep over. That is the weight behind what is happening in Las Vegas right now. And it only landed already built before this conversation started. Because here is the thing about the Raiders that I think is getting lost in how this story is being covered. The Tyreek Hill pursuit is not the story of a desperate franchise throwing money at a big name hoping it fixes something broken. It is the story of a franchise that has quietly assembled something real over the last 12 months and is now in a position where one more piece could make the entire construction genuinely terrifying for the rest of the AFC. That properly, before we get to what Hill actually does to a defense, because the context is what makes this potentially historic rather than just expensive. Start with Fernando Mendoza, because everything flows from him. I am not going to hedge on this. I am not going to soften it with qualifications about sample size or give you the cautious framing that the national conversation has defaulted to when discussing a young quarterback who has not yet compiled 3 full seasons of starting data. Mendoza is the most mentally composed young quarterback I have seen enter this league in years. And I do not mean that in the shallow way that phrase gets thrown around when analysts want to sound thoughtful without committing to anything specific. I mean it in the precise and observable way, the way it shows up in film study, in how he processes information before the snap, in how he manages his own emotional state when a drive stalls or a protection breaks down. There is a story from the first day of the off-season program this year that I keep coming back to. Mendoza sat down in a film room with Kirk Cousins, not because a position coach scheduled it, not as a staged moment for a team-building feature piece the PR department wanted to produce. He sought it out because that is genuinely who he is, someone whose relationship with preparation is internal and constant, and does not require external motivation to activate. That quality, that specific orientation toward the craft, is rarer than any measurable athletic trait, and it is the foundation that every decision this franchise has made this offseason is being built on top of. Ashton Jeanty exists in that backfield, and I need you to understand what that actually means for a defense preparing against this offense on a weekly basis, because the way Jeanty gets discussed in most places reduces him to his statistical output, and his statistical output, as impressive as it is, actually understates the problem he creates. The real value Jeanty provides is not the yards he gains. It is the defensive decisions he forces on every single snap, regardless of whether he ever touches the ball. When a coordinator knows, genuinely knows from painful film review experience, that any handoff on any down from any personnel grouping can become a 60 or 70-yard run, if gap discipline fails for even a fraction of a second, the entire defensive alignment shifts. Extra bodies down near the line, safety depth adjusted, linebacker assignments prioritizing run fits over underneath pass coverage zones. And every adjustment made to account for Jeanty simultaneously opens something somewhere else. He is not just a running back. He is a structural pressure on the defensive architecture that manufactures advantages for every other offensive weapon by demanding a level of respect that draws resources away from them. In a Kubiak system, where the entire offensive philosophy is built around identifying and exploiting the commitments defenses make to eliminate one specific threat, a running back who forces that degree of attention is worth more than any counting statistic communicates. Brock Bowers is already here, and I genuinely feel like the league has still not fully processed what that means. Linebackers cannot cover him in space. That is simply not a realistic assignment at the NFL level against his combination of size and acceleration. Safeties cannot outmuscle him at the catch point consistently enough to take him away as an option. Corners are not built to handle what he does in the intermediate areas of the field, where his football intelligence and route precision create separation that does not depend on athleticism alone. Every snap, some defender on the opposing roster is being put in a matchup the game has not equipped him to win. Bowers wins those confrontations at a rate that defies any defensive solution short of redirecting so much coverage attention toward him that you are handing clean looks to everyone else on the field. He is one of the 2 or 3 most valuable tight ends in professional football, and he is already in silver and black, already changing how coordinators build their game plans against this team every single week. That is not a future asset. That is a present reality. And Maxx Crosby anchoring the defensive front gives the entire organization a competitive identity and a weekly edge that permeates through the film room of every offensive coordinator, trying to figure out how to protect their quarterback against Las Vegas. He is still the kind of disruptive presence that gets circled on game plans and draws extra protection resources, which by necessity frees the rest of that defensive front to operate in cleaner situations. That is the structure the Raiders walked into draft weekend with. And I want to give that draft more credit than it has received in most of the coverage I have seen, because something important happened across those 3 days that tends to go unappreciated until it quietly separates good rebuilds from ones that plateau too early. This franchise went into the draft with actual clarity. They knew who their quarterback was. They knew what their system demanded from the players around him. They understood that every pick after the first needed to address a genuine, specific, identifiable organizational need rather than a projection or an athletic profile that looked interesting on paper. Day 2 and Day 3 of any NFL draft are where roster depth is either carefully constructed or quietly abandoned. The Raiders did not abandon them. Every selection connected to something real, a real need, a real cultural fit, a real functional contribution to building a 53-man roster without the structural vulnerabilities that opposing coordinators locate and exploit systematically over a 17-game season. By the honest standard of what those rounds are actually supposed to accomplish, this was organizational progress that will show up in October and November in ways that the draft coverage in late April never fully captures. Now Tyreek Hill. And I want to take my time here because the easy description of what he does, he is the fastest player in football, is true and simultaneously almost completely inadequate for capturing why his presence changes an offense at a level that is categorically different from what other elite speed receivers produce. Most receivers with elite straight line speed create a specific and reasonably well understood defensive problem. They threaten deep, they run vertical routes, demand safety respect over the top, force too high shells and bracket coverages and zone concepts designed to eliminate the explosive play and force the offense to be patient underneath. Those answers are imperfect, but they are functional. Defenses have spent decades refining their responses to elite speed receivers. And while no solution is perfect, the general framework is understood and executable. None of it works against Tyreek Hill, and the reason is precise. His speed does not threaten one level of the field. It threatens all of them at once, and that is a genuinely different problem than anything those defensive frameworks were designed to solve. Think about what that actually means on a play-by-play basis. A screen pass to the flat, 5 yards, simple concept, the kind of play every defense practices stopping in training camp, becomes a 50-yard gain because no defender in pursuit can close the angle once Hill reaches open space at full acceleration. A shallow crossing route transforms into a house call because the linebacker in technically correct position simply cannot match his gear change through the second level of the defense. A quick out route that corners work on daily against receivers with excellent technique becomes a 25-yard gain because the corner who is in perfect position still cannot turn and run fast enough to limit the yards after the catch. There is no safe cushion distance you can give Tyreek Hill. Soft coverage surrenders volume and chunks. Press coverage is a bet that your corner can stay in phase with a 4.29 40 through a double move. And that is a bet most corners in this league cannot win consistently. Safety brackets protect against him, but simultaneously hand one-on-one matchups to every other weapon on the field. Every defensive answer generates a new, indefensible problem somewhere else in the formation. That genuine impossibility, the inability to solve for one specific player without creating a different unsolvable problem on the other side of the field, is what has made Hill one of the most impactful offensive players in the history of professional football, not just one of the most exciting ones. Now put him inside this specific Raiders offense and really think about what a defensive coordinator is facing when he sits down in his film room on a Wednesday morning. The run game is already a strategic emergency because Jeanty can break any handoff to the open field if gap discipline cracks for even a second, which means extra defenders are being kept honest near the line on every possession. Bowers in the middle of the field is already an unsolvable matchup problem that secondary resources have to account for on a consistent basis. Kubiak is running play action off heavy run tendencies, using motion and misdirection to manufacture clean throwing windows, installing RPOs that punish defensive overcommitment to stopping the ground game. And now on the perimeter, on every single snap, from wide, from the slot, from motion, potentially from the backfield, you have the most explosively dangerous receiver this league has seen in a generation. Where does the extra safety go? Which threat do you consciously decide to leave in single coverage? There is no formation in the playbook that eliminates all of those problems simultaneously. There is no call that neutralizes Jeanty and Bowers and Hill on the same play. Every down, a coordinator is making a deliberate choice about which version of being beaten is the least damaging outcome on this particular snap. And in an offense That's run by a coach who has spent his entire career identifying and attacking whatever commitment a defense has made to take something away. That is a catastrophic position to be in for 17 regular season games plus a playoff run. I want to be honest with you about the complications because I think pretending they do not exist does a disservice to what is actually a genuinely complex situation. This is still a negotiation, and negotiations between an aging elite receiver and a team managing real cap constraints collapse for reasons that have nothing to do with mutual desire or organizational urgency. The Raiders have committed meaningful money this offseason across multiple positions, and the financial architecture of this roster has to maintain discipline even in the pursuit of a talent this significant. Hill is not arriving in Las Vegas on a sentiment-driven discount. He knows his market value with precision, and the deal that actually gets signed has to give him the financial security he is legitimately entitled to seek while preserving enough flexibility for Las Vegas to stay competitive at every level of a 53-man roster. That is a real negotiation with real complexity on both sides, and the personal involvement of the owner, while significant as a signal, does not automatically make the numbers align. The culture question is something I want to address directly rather than sidestepping it, because the Miami chapter of Hill's career produced friction that does not simply disappear from consideration when evaluating organizational fit. The culture Kubiak is deliberately constructing in Las Vegas has a specific character. It is built around a quarterback whose entire professional identity is rooted in accountability, daily investment, and collective humility. Whoever walks through that door needs to genuinely add to that environment, not just tolerate it on a contractual basis. But here's why I am not spending significant energy worrying about that dimension of this pursuit specifically. The fact that this campaign is being driven at the coaching and ownership level simultaneously tells me that the internal conversations about fit have already happened. The Raiders are not approaching Hill with incomplete information about who he is and what he has represented in a locker room. They have that visibility. They have apparently processed it and concluded the answer is sufficient to push forward with the urgency that personal ownership involvement signals. Coaches who are genuinely invested in what they are building do not lobby for players they believe will undermine it. The timing of this pursuit is itself a piece of information worth reading carefully. It is happening now, after the draft, when Cleveland has full visibility into exactly what their roster looks like, with rookie contracts factored in, with depth positions addressed, with the cap picture clarified. Pursuing Hill with this level of intensity at this specific moment suggests the internal financial math has been completed, and the conclusion is that the deal is executable without compromising the structural integrity of what is already assembled. That kind of deliberate, sequenced organizational decision-making, draft first, understand the full picture, then pursue the transformational addition from a position of clarity rather than desperation, reflects a front office operating with a coherence that this franchise has not consistently demonstrated in recent memory. If this gets done, I want you to genuinely sit inside the perspective of an opposing defensive coordinator preparing for Las Vegas on a Wednesday afternoon in November. Mendoza operating a system built specifically around his processing style, developing inside an environment that has given him every resource a young quarterback needs to become what he is capable of becoming. Jeanty making the run game a genuine strategic emergency that forces commitment near the line of scrimmage regardless of what the down and distance suggests. Bowers winning his matchup in the middle of the field with a reliability that has become almost mechanical. Hill on the perimeter, making every single coverage decision feel like choosing the least painful of several painful outcomes. Crosby setting the defensive standard and pulling the competitive temperature of the entire unit upward through the force of his own daily preparation. Kubiak connecting all of it from the sideline in a system designed from the foundation to leverage exactly this kind of concentrated talent. That is not a team you approach with moderate concern and a standard game plan. That is a team you dedicate your entire week to and still feel genuinely uncertain about come Saturday night. The distance this franchise has traveled in 1 year is something I want to state directly rather than imply, because it is remarkable and it is real. A year ago, quarterback instability had become a defining organizational characteristic. Defensive inconsistency made every result feel arbitrary. Roster construction was reactive and short-term. The general national posture toward this franchise was something between mild sympathy and polite indifference. Now look at what actually exists. A franchise quarterback secured through a patient, deliberate process. A generational running back reshaping defensive game plans. One of the most disruptive pass rushers in football anchoring the defensive identity. A coaching staff with genuine system credibility. A draft class that addressed real needs with real fits. And at the ownership level, a personal campaign to add the most explosively dangerous receiver the league has produced in a generation. That convergence, real infrastructure meeting, real talent meeting real organizational coherence, is what separates franchises that are trending upward from franchises that have actually arrived at the moment where the rest of the conference has to take them seriously. If Tyreek Hill is in Las Vegas when training camp opens, the AFC spends the summer recalibrating. The Raiders will not be the team everyone else is comfortable looking past. They will be the team everyone else is spending their Wednesday afternoons trying to figure out how to stop.